for joining us. My name's Dave Rees. I'm the managing partner at Convergence. Appreciate you all making the time to join us this morning. If you're not aware of just how stark New Zealand's productivity problem is, I'll give you a quick stat. We work longer hours than 70% of the other OECD countries, but we need to work an extra day every week in order just to match the average OECD output. So delighted to have Ian Walsh from Argon Co with me this morning to talk about why that productivity problem exists and what we can do about it. So morning, Ian. Great to have you with us.
Good morning. Thanks, Dave.
Just before we get into it, if you're not familiar with Argon Co, they're a global improvement consulting firm. Their client base is very much a who's who of corporates around the world, Sony, Amazon, Airbus, just a few of a really extensive list. Ian is an expert in operational improvement. He's got 30 plus years experience behind him. He's led numerous transformation initiatives and very much regarded as a global expert, particularly in lean methodologies. He's also recognized as a thought leader in the topic of productivity. So he delivers programs for universities, government, private training institutes, and just the sort of person we need to help unpack the productivity issue. So we're going to dig into it over the next 40 to 45 minutes, and then we're going to move into a Q&A so we can answer all your questions on the topic. Please use the chat function. It's a useful placeholder for any questions that occur to you along the way, and then we can kind of bank those and get into them at the end. Ian, before we get to the heart of the productivity problem, perhaps just give us a sense of why we should be concerned about productivity at all. So what does it really mean for organizations and for us as individuals?
Yeah, I think it's great to see this conversation has been growing over the last 2 or 3 years, and I think we've got a growing awareness of the nature of the problem. And I guess it struck me probably 20 plus years ago, having spent 15 or 20 years traveling around the world, and spent some time in Japan and Asia and the US and other places. And when I came back, having been away for 15 years, nothing in New Zealand had changed. And so the way we were doing things in the mid-80s was still the way we were doing stuff in the mid-2000s. And the reality is a lot of those economies and, making similar things to we were doing. So if you looked at some of the dairy producers or some of the beverage producers or some of the plastics and other producers, their efficiencies were 20 to 30% better than ours were then. And that gap, has been sustained, and if anything has got worse. So it was very stark to me that New Zealand had fallen behind, and probably the right way to think about it is the world actually accelerated. We kept doing what we were doing, but they all adopted better practices, better methodologies, invested in the right technologies. And I'm not saying they were all successful, but on average, en masse, they were accelerating while we were stagnating. And it's actually one of the reasons I came back was to make a difference to New Zealand. So helping New Zealand businesses become world-class and outperform their competition was really one of the key things so that we could sustain our quality of life. Fundamentally, productivity underpins your quality of life, what your government can afford, what the social processes and services you want to invest in, the education, the health, and all those things that we all want are underpinned by a productive economy. And when you don't have a productive economy, we start having to cut things. And then ultimately, you end up with some of your core capability falling apart. And it's a bit like the synergies you see when a panel beater and a welder and a car parts and a whatever all live in the same village and they all work together and they're all a cluster. When one of them falls over, the whole cluster becomes worse and then becomes unproductive and unsustainable. So it's really, really critical we maintain capability and keep pace, and if anything, improve dramatically our productivity so that we can sustain the quality of life we'd all love to have.
So this becomes a sort of a sinking lid, essentially. If you don't keep up, you get further and further behind because you're less capable of catching up.
That's the risk. There's a tipping point, and we need to avoid that tipping point. I think we've lost some things already in the last 20 years, but we want to make sure we protect the vital and then grow the things that we really want to be best at.
How well understood are the differences between, the sort of upper decile or top quartile of performers productivity wise and New Zealand? You mentioned you come back from overseas and you see the difference, but is it clear why that difference exists, and talk us through some of the challenges?
Yeah, yeah. Look, I think if you look at your upper quartile performers, and people like Fisher and Paykel, who on a productivity index I think they're sitting around 12 or 14 to 1. And the average for that kind of industry is 3 to 4. So they're outperforming the industry by factors of 3 or 4. And for anyone who's been around some of their facilities and seen how much dollars per meter, per labor hour, that they can generate. And it's a high margin product. It's an innovative product. So there's a number of other elements, of course. But if you look at that compared to, say, your average assembly process, because effectively they're assembling devices. You've also got some injection molding and other things. But if you look at your average producer, they are significantly more productive per labor hour. And I know of a number of sites that if I compared them in terms of their throughput and output per labor hour, the difference is very stark. And it's because they have deeply embedded systems and processes, a deeply embedded culture, and they have relentlessly pursued that for now, I would say, 15 or so years.
So there's kind of a sort of what you might call sort of firm level considerations, and from what I understand, there's also a set of things that are more sort of structural, more macro. So we dig into those first, and then sort of get into the firm level stuff after.
Sure. So I think if you well, I'm just thinking about the best way to articulate this. It's easy to do a number of things that are not actually a competitive advantage. So things like having special chats with your suppliers to see if you can, get a better deal, relaying out, investing in certain machinery. A lot of that stuff sounds very sexy, but actually your competitors can do all those things. So you should do them, but you shouldn't see them as a strategic competitive advantage, because it doesn't actually deliver something your competitors can't do. And I remember quite vividly going around, and I actually worked in Japan for about a year at a Procter and Gamble site, and they actually don't mind people going to look around, and they say that we don't mind because you can't steal culture with your eyes. And fundamentally, and I'll give you some sort of perspective on that. As a site, they'd been on a journey for about 15 years of continuous improvement, eliminating and solving problems to root cause, creating a culture of, almost driving towards perfection. They had 2 million safe hours. Their OEE, for those people who are into those kind of numbers, was sitting at about 97%. And this is after they'd sped up the machines by over 30-40%. So they had relentlessly identified waste, eliminated waste, and they had a culture of continuously doing that. And that was driven by leadership, drive, commitment, energy, focus. And when you think about that as a competitive advantage, I mean, I wouldn't want to start a factory competing with them in the same way I wouldn't want to start a factory competing with Toyota, because the capital investment is massive and the opportunity to do better is tiny, and will take decades. So they have almost an unassailable competitive advantage.
It sounds like so much of that is embedded in the culture and the leadership. So why the gap? What is it about that mentality and that attitude, that mindset, that enables them to excel versus New Zealand firms, with some notable exceptions, as you kind of pointed to? Why do we struggle here so much?
Yeah, and I was reflecting on this a number of times. And I think you've got, so the Japanese piece is kind of interesting, because post World War II, they were obviously flattened. There was a massive rebuild program, and they had a burning platform. So the need to change, the need to try different things, the need to pull themselves out of where they were was massive, and there was huge commitment from all institutions. So they created a ministry called Industry and Trade, where they aligned the finance sector, universities, government, and business holistically, and invested in the things that they knew they needed to be best at. And they invited guys like Deming over to do research and do seminars and so on. And that resulted in a whole bunch of the top companies adopting what was then statistical process control, or new quality management techniques, which ultimately became quality circles and then led to what we would call lean, but actually Toyota just says it's just the way we do stuff, and it's a culture. So a burning platform is really helpful, and a macro alignment between business, finance, government, to enable these businesses to achieve their potential. Invest in best practice, invest in the new technologies, the new ideas, to create the momentum so that they can achieve, strategic competitive advantage.
Yeah, interesting. But interesting to point to the kind of the reasons behind it. But you think about New Zealand's often compared to other small advanced economies,
Sure.
Ireland, Scandinavian countries. What is in each case? Is there a set of kind of individual characteristics that set them apart, or is there kind of a collection that is kind of common to all?
Yeah, look, and I think there's a couple of things going on here. So, firstly, when I run sessions in New Zealand with business leaders, and I do that reasonably often, if I said to them how many of them have actually understood what best practice in their industry is, how do they best deliver value, what is world class, and how many of them are actually adopting any of those practices into their business, I typically get about 10%. So about 10% say, "Oh, yep, no, I've heard of that stuff, and we're doing some things, and we're at the beginning, or we've been doing it for a couple of years." Or very rarely I get, "Yes, we've been doing this for over 10 years now, and it's deeply embedded." Especially in the small mediums, the larger organizations, and we've worked extensively with a few of those. So folks like Fonterra started their improvement journey in around 99. It was in Kiwi Dairy, and then rolled out through Fonterra in 2003. And by 2010, I think they were on record as saying it had made them inflation neutral for 7 years at that time. So saved them hundreds of millions and billions by now. But they are what I would call big end of town. They've got huge resources and capacity. They do global benchmarking. They can invest in all those things, and they do, and they've been leading the dairy sector. And what I would say in that example is, almost every dairy company that I know of in New Zealand now has a best practice program, and that's if you want to think about the reasons, it's because, well, gosh, Fonterra is a big part of the market, and they are going down that road with some gusto and making huge gains. You don't want to be left behind trying to meet their payout if you don't have that stuff. And the same is true in a couple of other sectors. So the kiwi fruit post-harvest sector has done quite a lot of this kind of work, but again, fairly large organizations. When you look at the SME sector, the level of exposure to what is world class and how high the bar is, and what you need to go and do and see that, not many have been able to do that. And so they aren't aware of what it takes, which is a gap. As opposed to someone like Ireland, who are in the middle of Europe and surrounded by big multinationals with lots of sites and lots of exposure, and so they see this stuff all the time, and it's only what is it, a jump, hop, skip, and a jump to have a look at it in Europe. So we've got that tyranny of distance, which disables some of our businesses from seeing what this looks like. And if I just expand on that a little bit, if you actually went around New Zealand and said, who's actually worked in a world-class company, who are right at the leading edge, who's actually been through a world-class transformation, and so knows what the change looks like and how to do it, I think you'd find there are very, very few around. which is a problem because you need that knowledge capability in order to drive that change. So
Yeah,
hopefully that provides some food for thought on that one.
yeah. I guess the common denominator of the likes of Fonterra, fruit exporters, Fisher and Paykel is that they're competing on a global stage. And so their hand is to some extent forced by the market to be competitive, otherwise they're competed out. Whereas a lot of New Zealand firms don't have that priority.
Compelling
Yeah,
drive.
they're competing with other companies that are competing locally, and therefore they don't have that agenda.
Yeah, and I'd say historically we've got away with that. And now what we're finding is the barriers to entry and market are reducing. And so you're seeing global players who typically, wouldn't look at New Zealand from a scale and size standpoint. It's not a big market compared to others, but actually the barrier to entry, the ability to market, you don't actually have to have a retail network or a physical presence in order to distribute products anymore, and you can market them globally. And the internet and the web enables a lot of the omni-channel kind of things to happen. So the competitors are now coming from potentially anywhere, and a lot of the smaller businesses that have been protected by that in the past, those barriers are reducing. And so, yeah, it's now is the time.
Yeah, interesting. So
Yesterday was a better day, but today's a good day.
there's been quite a lot in the press recently around productivity. Do you think that's maybe sparked to some extent or another by the fact that it's becoming a global stage? If you're not exporting and therefore competing globally, that's one thing. But now you're potentially going to have your lunch cut by new entrants coming in from overseas.
Sorry, Dave, I lost a little bit of that.
Yeah, just building on what you were saying, I wonder whether firms here are starting to feel that pinch of competitors coming in and competing.
Yeah, yeah, I think that the productivity question is, if we want to stay globally competitive and generate export dollars, which is, that ultimately is determining our quality of life. The more export dollars we can generate, our balance of payments gets better, our economy gets better, our ability to borrow gets better, we can invest in infrastructure and so on. So it really is that important. And while it's great to be brilliant in your own market, we actually need more businesses to grow, scale, and export, so that we can generate that positive balance of payments.
What is the reason that they don't? Is there? I mean, I expect there's multiple reasons, but you just touch on a few of those.
Yeah, and I've seen a few over the years. So there are some great success stories, and I think we have to recognise, some of those folks who've actually created a business. Folks like Pro-Life Foods, for example, have grown massively over the last 10 years. They now supply all of Coles and a bunch of others, and moving into Asia, and really a great success story. So there are examples where businesses have grown tenfold and exported, but I think the barriers to that, there's a little bit of the historical. We're a isolated area of the planet. People have got a good business, and the old BMW batch and boat kind of thinking. So a lot of businesses are going well, and we're doing well. Why would we take on all the stress of trying to establish a presence in other markets, and all the complexity that brings, and all the organizational structure and development and investment you have to make? So there's kind of been a hurdle, and I think a lot of businesses have, rather than climb the hurdle, have said, okay, we're happy where we are. But I think we're now at a time when we need a lot more businesses to say, actually, we're going to take on that challenge, and we have to figure out how to, and I use the word clustering generically, but create scale, so that we can actually address some of these concerns. And I mean, there's great support from organizations like NZTE to help you get into market, and there's better systems and processes than there were 10 years ago. But we actually also need to figure out how to collaborate to create scale, vertically integrate various businesses to enable us to crack markets, and that will provide the agility that we need as well. because owning your entire vertical supply chain can be an expensive activity. Whereas if you can do that in a collaborative way, you can actually overcome some of the barriers of capital.
So from the sounds of things, appetite is one thing. There just hasn't been the appetite there necessarily, but people might find that their hands are being forced a little bit. But by the sound of things, there is good support there. You know, if you do want to expand or export and grow and get to that scale, there's the
Yep.
ability to do that now.
Yeah, much better. And I think there's a number of organizations like the Ice House who are helping owner managers understand, what their business strategy is and how to execute that strategy. And just to put it in context, New Zealand is 80, 90% small, medium, so less than 100 people, 80%, I think, less than 50 people. And when you think about the owner manager or the founder having to manage a growing business, all the people, HR, training, financial and other obligations, as well as sales and marketing, and then go, well, now, how are you going to globally expand? That kind of requires a lot of resource and commitment and energy, and how we wrap people around those folks to enable them to do that is critical. We're better than we were, and there are a lot more organizations helping with that, but we've got a lot more to do.
What would you like to see then if we were to sort of find that problem surmountable? Like, what do we need to do to get there?
And I think you've seen examples of this, and there's some great research. I think we talked about the McKinsey study a little while ago, but there are what I would call beachheads, but it's leading companies. So, and each leading company drags a bunch along with them. And so it's about investing in those areas where we can win. We have the people, the capability, the resources, the ideas to beat the world, and the potential. And if we can address those ones, give them the leg up that they need, what they do is they accelerate. They outperform the market, as I said, by 3 or 4 to 1, and then they drag along a bunch of other companies with them, and they create, what I would call clusters or a network of associated companies who are all on a really positive journey. And then you create capability. And, there are examples. The one that's referred to a bit, and for those folks who've been into some of the Productivity Commission work that was done around frontier businesses, things like Lego in Denmark. There's nothing particularly special about plastic manufacture, but they have made it special, and they've built deep capability. And now you have a whole network of businesses around Lego who, can tell you anything you want to know about plastic. They can do it in lots of different ways. And oh my gosh, they've even got a film industry. So, who saw Lego Batman coming?
Yeah, exactly. I guess there's, classically, there's like knowledge spillover and talent pools that come as a consequence of those clusters. But what other advantages do you see from sort of clusters?
Well, you get you get efficiencies in terms of, and I think you mentioned a couple there. You grow a talent pool. So and the way the world is going, it's becoming a knowledge war, and talent is the key currency. So when I was in the US 20 years ago, your big multinationals were identifying their top 100 and ensuring that the CEOs and execs were spending 10 to 15 days a year with them to nurture them to be future leaders. So they were very, very focused around how do we grow our future talent pool? How do we make sure that we've got the best leaders who are going to take us into the future? And so that's a critical part. When you get a bit of scale, you can invest more in people and capability and talent development. And there's huge gaps here, especially at first and second level. So the studies from the OECD a few years ago showed that New Zealand was the bottom of the OECD in terms of first and second level operational leadership. And so that's a handbrake on progress, because we need great leaders to lead our businesses. So scale allows you to do that. It also allows you to share ideas, technology, and innovation. Obviously, in a cluster with its ring fenced and IP agreements, you can do that. You also create efficiencies around logistics because obviously they locate or they co-locate very close. And so you get a lot of efficiencies around movement of goods, services, and people.
Yeah. Are there other things that can be done at sort of these sort of clusters tend to be set up sort of almost like on a policy level. So there are other things that sort of structural kind of macro considerations that sort of government can lead in order to help address the productivity problem.
Yeah, look, and in fair recognition, over the last few years, the government supported the Callaghan Lean program, which a number of companies have undertaken and got good benefits out of. The SIRI, Smart Industry Readiness Index assessments have been run and been funded. And I think, I'm not sure what the plan is in future, but I believe there'll be some announcements around how that's going to go forward in the next few months. But a range of businesses have been supported by those. But I think when you start thinking about how do we get businesses to invest in the R&D and the innovation that they need, then things like depreciation offsets and those kind of incentives will help businesses to invest more where they need to. And I think creating some focus around what are those areas that we really need to win at. So clearly we've been great at dairy. We're a fantastic primary producer. We're also doing some pretty special things in the technology space, especially agri-tech. And so, there are probably a couple of others that you could mention that would be targets for, gosh, how do we accelerate these, create the beachhead, get people to collaborate? How do we enable that? And I think we could do better at incentivizing businesses to, co-locate to create those efficiencies.
Yeah, I mean, given how sort of fundamental productivity improvement is to overall quality of life, and the fact that when you look around the world, the factors that enable other countries to flourish are pretty well known and understood. What is holding New Zealand back from a political? Why is the political will not there, even though some good work's been done? Why are we not moving further, faster on some of these initiatives?
Yeah, look, so I think if you take a macro view, it's well recognised that our infrastructure is not up to scratch. I was watching a TV thing the other night around our average speeds on our roads, and the AA said, well, basically it's if I distill it all down, it's the quality of our roads. You can't go faster. Every now and then you have to go through a town and you have all these different speed limits. And then when you think about the impact of that on logistics and movement and hours and time and efficiencies and so on, getting stuff up and down the country is a really expensive exercise compared to, if you look at the US with its state highways or the UK even, although it's super busy, they do have a great road structure. France, they're all going 130 k's an hour. So we don't have some of the infrastructure we need to enable the productivity. So I think that's a right area to focus on, and it's been slow to be addressed, I think would be a fair statement. So that's a macro. What are the other things holding us back, if you like, from a high level policy perspective is really about how we grow the great leaders. And I'm hearing good discussions around leadership development and the need to create the right courses and restructure, Te Pakenga to deliver more competency as opposed to quals seems to be the focus. And I think those are all good things.
Yeah, I wonder whether does that need to start at an earlier level, whether it's university level or even prior to that. I mean, I don't know whether it's sort of outside of your remit, but I wonder to what extent the education system here needs to support that.
Yeah, no, we've seen programs run in schools and been highly effective at growing great leaders who then go into business, cut their teeth on people management and grow into being great leaders. So, I'd be an advocate for, how do we actually provide school leavers with some of the capability that will see them right into the workplace. And yes, the universities and the techs all have a role to play, and some of them are doing it to some degree. So I'm not being critical of the work that they do today, but I think we could do more targeted, better, and collaborate together with a common vision around, we want to grow, we want to move off the bottom of the leadership table, and we want to grow some of these future leaders who will take us forward.
So if you're a leader in sort of a mid-sized business or large business or SME, what are some of the actions that you can take from this? If you wanted to move business ahead and kind of focus on productivity, what are some of the kind of key actions to take?
Yeah, and I think there's two levels of this. If you think about it in a supply chain business, so it depends what the nature of business it is, but if you're a supply chain, and sort of separating manufacturing out a little bit here, then it's critical to think about your value streams. And the way I would describe that is, if you think about Jetstar, so Jetstar is a good operator. They have a good safety record. They don't do as many flights as Air New Zealand down the main trunk. And they may be seen as more of a value proposition. And what's the value that people want from that interaction is typically, it's a price-driven value offering. Whereas an Air New Zealand is not trying to compete on price, they're competing on service, delivery, value add wraparounds, because people want certainty of travel, or they want flexibility of travel, and they want some of the wraparounds. So two different value streams, and your business should line up with delivering that value through your entire value stream. So if you're all about, cost and price, then you should be doing things very cost efficient throughout your entire value stream. And as a leader, you should be establishing metrics to see how you're doing against best class or best practice in each of those areas. So do we actually have a KPI that measures those things throughout my entire value stream? As a leader, do I have that? And have I coached people in how to optimize that? And if I ask that question of a bunch of first level leaders, have you actually mapped your value stream? Do you understand why people choose your product versus others, or your service versus others? Do you know what the key metrics are along that value stream? Are you measuring it? And are you able to actually improve those metrics? Do you have the skills and capability to drive those things? I'd say you're probably going to hit some gaps in most cases. But we need to do that in a manufacturing sense. So just to pick that up for the manufacturers, is if you're in a commodity good, and let's just pick dairy because we all understand it, but milk powder is a commodity. If you want to be world class in that, then you better be the low cost producer, because you're going to ship this around the world. You're competing with milk powder from wherever else, and if you're $5 a kilo dearer, you're not going to be in business. So your whole manufacturing effort is about being the low cost producer, which means tons per man hour, total dollars per man hour. Those are all productivity measures. And how do we get there? How do we get to be the low cost producer? So when I talk about my Japanese experience, and they're sitting at 95% OEE on assets they've sped up 50%, and then you go, well, gosh, if you're a high volume commodity dairy processor with ingredients, then you better be in the 90 pluses from an OEE standpoint, with that value of assets to be competitive. And your entire value stream needs to be lined up with getting your product to market as cost efficiently as possible, obviously maintaining the quality of your product throughout the value stream. But you need to align all those things, and the leaders need to understand those. They need to measure them, and they know how to drive, and they must know how to drive them.
Yeah, what jumps out at me is that while this is all very valid stuff, this is not necessarily sort of new news. This kind of value stream optimization or competitive strategy, comes out of the mid-80s or something with Michael Porter, right? So we've known this for quite quite a long time. What is it about other countries that have kind of leaders have taken this and run with it, whereas here not so much? I kind of touched on a few points, but you're talking with people day in day out. Why is there that sort of knowledge gap, or if there's not a knowledge gap, the kind of the translation of knowledge to action?
Yeah, and I'll give you a the real life experience. I went to a meeting with some executives at Kimberly-Clark in the mid-90s in America, and I said I was discussing with them the need to adopt best practices and some of the lean practices and other things, and they said we don't really know much about this, but you could be right, and we can't afford not to know. So we're gonna go and we're gonna try this and see what we learn. I went to a large New Zealand organization that I won't mention in the mid 2000s, said the same thing, and they said, "Oh, that's interesting stuff, but it doesn't work here."
Okay, so there's just a very clear difference in mindset.
Absolutely, because the competitive landscape in the US is brutal. It's a talent war. You've got lots and lots of competitors. If one of them gets a leg up with something that's significant or better, you may never catch up, and they can't afford to miss it. We, as I said earlier, have been supported by geography or protected by it, and a lot of our businesses haven't been able to get the kind of information and knowledge around what is best practice and what does it look like and what could it mean. That's beyond scale. So a lot of them are like, well, hey, we're doing well here. Why do I need to change? I'm good. And until you actually see, the platforms burning and we're losing some market share and we're not competitive overseas, hopefully that's not too late. But what I'm suggesting is we really need to get ahead of the curve before the platform burns and sinks, because the competitors are now coming from everywhere, and they have access to market like they never used to. So the need to change is great, but the reasons why we haven't changed is because lack of awareness, lack of knowledge, lack of engagement, generally. So obviously there are exceptions and some great case studies and some great leaders who've delivered and done this. And so there are examples in New Zealand where there are businesses that have been very successful and delivered some significant improvements and so on. And the more we have of those, the more the rest will follow. But we need to create more beachheads.
Do we do enough to showcase those examples? You shared a few of them, but you kind of think, well, are they almost hidden away? Versus sort of democratizing that and kind of showcasing it for people to learn from those examples.
Yeah, Look, I think there's been some efforts, and again, you have to recognise folks like Callaghan and NZTE and others who have done that, but you can never do enough. I think we've got to. It's that whole education sector, it's the building awareness, it's the exposing leaders to it, and actually then, helping them see how it can benefit their business. And there is a lot of case study, but I don't think everybody's aware of the extent of that and what it could mean for their businesses.
What
But,
about
for the folks online, I would say, there almost isn't a business I've been to in New Zealand that couldn't get a 20 or 30% improvement in productivity in the next 12 months by adopting these practices. I've seen about 1,400 different businesses in the last 30 years, and I think there's only 3 or 4 where I would say that was not true.
So where should people start looking for that? I mean, there's this immense amount of resource, obviously, on online training courses, huge development opportunities. So,
Yeah.
if you're a business and you want to get that 20-30% improvement over the next 12 months, what's your kind of action steps?
Yeah, look, I think a lot of the times they actually know what their frustrations are. So if you sat folks down and said, what are the things that cause you pain, stress, rework, grief, and if you actually sit down and work through, map those things, you'll find there's a lot of losses, a lot of waste. There's studies done on workplace organization where it shows that 50% of the time is spent looking for stuff, going to find stuff. So they look busy, but they're not actually adding value to something that someone would pay for.
Mhm.
And so in Toyota, Taiichi Ono had a process where he'd draw a circle on a process and he'd put someone in the circle and say, spend a day and watch the waste. So how much waiting is there? How much extra movement is there? How much transportation is there? How much rework is there? How much unnecessary movement is there? How much inventory is there? And when you actually start to categorize all those things, it becomes a big number very, very quickly. And so it's kind of look at your own processes with a different mindset. And fortunately for me, I spent a year in that factory in Japan, and afterwards, all I could see everywhere was waste. You know, we're waiting for this, and you've all had the customer service experience where you sit on the phone and we'll be right with you. And then where's the callback facility, or where's the thing that values my time? But I could spend 20, 30 minutes waiting for someone to answer me, but I'm a customer. Is that how we want to treat customers? That's all waste. I consider it waste.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose, like anything, once you adopt that mindset, you start viewing the world through that lens, and so new things emerge just as a consequence of kind of seeing them in that frame.
And I'd say that's the culture that, the Toyotas and others have created, is everybody relentlessly identifies waste and they relentlessly eliminate it. And so, they had over 200,000 suggestions last year for improvement, of which they implemented over 98%, I believe. So when you've got a whole workforce engaged in how do we get better every day, and we solve the things that they raise, you must relentlessly get better.
I suppose there's often a bit of a catch-22 in these sort of situations. If you don't have the time, a lot of people say we're busier than ever, but we don't necessarily have the time to incorporate these sorts of initiatives. But of course, obviously, if you don't, you never sort of free that time up. Yeah, when you think about sort of emerging technologies, and obviously AI is sort of the phrase on everybody's lips. To what extent do you think that is likely to kind of deliver what it's sort of heralded to, which in terms of productivity improvement and enable firms to sort of get that additional time?
Yeah, look, I think there's a couple of thoughts in this. Is that technology in and of itself does not deliver a competitive advantage, because your competitors can do it. But if you do it in the right way, i.e., what waste is it eliminating, and you understand the waste and the process that you're improving, and you deploy it very well, you can get incremental and step change gains. But you have to understand your process first. We understand our processes and our waste and our losses, and then we deploy AI in a very structured way. And I'll say this more broadly. I mean, AI, RPA, and others. So there's a number of different solutions depending on the nature of the work. Then you can get significant incremental gains that will free up time to enable people to be more creative. I mean, AI won't generate ideas for you to improve your process, but it will take away some of the highly repetitive, error-prone work, and it will also create new opportunities to do things that you frankly couldn't do before because of the volume of data that had to be processed. So it may open up new opportunities, but it sits on a foundation of we understand our processes and systems very well, and then we've deployed it to address certain use cases or certain opportunities. I think when folks think it's a silver bullet and apply that kind of approach to it, you'll probably be disappointed.
Yeah, interesting. I think new technology has this way of kind of promising amazing benefits, but there's that sort of productivity paradox that doesn't necessarily translate into time saved. So essentially, we need to be a lot more deliberate about the way that we think about these types of savings.
Absolutely, and I think the culture that you have drives the outcome that you get. So if you've got great people who understand your business, are knowledgeable, know your processes, and your processes are deeply embedded, then applying technology becomes significantly easier and lower risk. If you're employing it into an unstable environment, you don't have deeply documented and understood processes, then you're actually putting it into some shifting sand, and you may end up spending a lot of money and not getting the outcome you want.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. A lot of people have sort of been there and done that, I think.
Yeah.
We've got a few questions here, so let's kind of jump into that in the final 15 minutes. So we kind of touched on this a little bit, but I've got a question here from Nicole. Understanding that big companies embrace best practice, but how and where do small NZ companies start to improve productivity? What's the, if you're a 5-person, 10, 15-person business, what's your kind of go-to straight away?
Yeah, look, and I had a conversation with a business yesterday. What I would do is firstly get your experienced people together and talk about the areas of your greatest frustration and pain that if you could wave your magic wand and it would go away, what would that be? And then I would do a brown paper process map of that process. Now whether it's order to cash or procure to pay or a sub process of that, map it, identify the wastes and losses, prioritize them, and then start working through them as a team. And what it'll start to do is create some engagement around, getting rid of your frustration. So that the first thing you're doing there is you're getting team engagement, i.e. we now feel empowered to fix our process. That's great. We're getting rid of some pain. That's great. That'll create a bit of capacity. Also great. We're learning a tool, process mapping. Out of that will come what other tools do we need, and things like workplace organization, or 5S as it's called, but problem solving and visual management. So using some of those foundational tools will actually help the team grow and develop capability. And then I'd suggest, get some external help to take you on the next step of the journey.
Being efficient and questioning how we do things is a mantra I share with the team, but without necessarily the know-how on how to eke out improvements. With older long-term staff, how do we build knowledge and desire to change and bring in new efficiencies?
Yeah, this is a good one. With more established workforce, so getting folks to change is and can be a battle by itself. There's some great work by John Cotter on change management. So if you haven't read some of that, but My Iceberg is Melting is one of my favorite books for this. And it talks about, create a powerful guiding coalition. So who are the people who are leading the change? Do we understand what the change is? Are we committed to the change? Therefore, are we ready to lead a change? That doesn't mean we have to be gurus. It just means we want to go in a certain direction. And then what's our vision? Where do we want to be? And then communicate that vision. So that's the leading change piece to those folks. And that's get alongside them and explain why we need to change and where we want to go and what it means for them. So the WIFM, what's in it for me, is always going to come up. And then the managing piece is, well, what are the critical metrics along your value stream? And so let's align with those, put those visually in your workplace so that they are tracked on a, whatever the appropriate frequency is, but typically daily, maybe hourly, depending on the nature. But let's track how we're doing. And so we can surface problems, not so that we can highlight deficiencies, but so we can surface problems, and then we can actually work together to solve those problems. And in that way, we'll create a team culture, and we'll start to move the dial. The other piece I'll add to it, with older and entrenched workforces, to move their culture, you have to firstly change behavior. So you have to get them to do different things. So a daily meeting to review losses would be a great start. So we actually start to talk about the losses and the wastes and where things didn't go right. And we start to capture those and start to assign actions to those. So we're changing the behavior. And what happens over time is that behavior will lead to a shift in attitude. And as their attitude shifts, these meetings were a waste, or I didn't get any value out of that, to actually they're not too bad, to, oh, I actually got some value out of that. That was good. So as their attitude shifts, then their belief system changes. And the psychologists will tell you that it typically takes 12 weeks of continuous reinforcement to move a belief system or to start to create a culture. And if you stop anywhere along that journey, it's called, the words just escaped me, but it's called devolution, if you like. It's where things go back to the way they were.
Okay, so you have to stay the course over that 12 weeks and beyond.
Yep, yep. And I've had this conversation with folks who've been on a continuous improvement journey in Japan and in Europe and others, and they say, if we stop doing it, then over time it'll decay because
You
people
regress.
will, it decays. And
Yeah.
so once you commit to changing a behavior and embedding some systems that drive that behavior change, you have to stay committed to that journey. Although you can reduce the frequency, obviously. You don't need to maintain the energy that you have on the beginning of a change journey.
Mm. Is New Zealand's employment legislation a barrier to driving an improvement in productivity? So I guess here, maybe maybe the implication here is that people run with poorer performance for longer than they should, with the belief that perhaps it's not expedient enough, current legislation for helping people to move on.
Yeah, yeah. Short answer is no. And it's a function of, if we had a great talent pool with lots of people who are highly capable, folks would be more willing to say, "Hey, this person isn't delivering the performance level that we need. We'll move on this and raise the bar." But actually, that's not the case, and so folks stay where they are. They don't address the problem. So it's more of a leadership gap. I don't think the employment legislation stops us becoming world class. And in fact, there are examples of companies that achieve great outcomes in NZ with the employment rules as they are. I think it's more about, the leadership, the decision making, and to some degree the talent pool.
Yeah, agreed. I think there's sometimes a better the devil you know type perception. Somebody might not be performing particularly well in a role, but you kind of think, well, what are the chances of getting an outstanding person for this? So yeah, again, interesting question. Holly
It's
said the focus so far has been on the efficiency side of productivity. What about the create new value to meet market demand side? What is in the way of us not capitalizing on market opportunities? Is the Beach Batch BMW constrained leadership ambition?
Yeah, we've talked a bit about efficiency, but these things also apply to the innovation cycle. So 50% of Toyota's new ideas and innovations come out of their value stream. So how could we make this product different or better? Gets fed back through into the engine, and they develop new ideas and new products and new whatever. So it's a virtuous cycle, and I don't see them as separate. And there's a lot of work. I think Alan Ward wrote the seminal text on lean NPD, which has been adopted by a bunch of companies and is pretty stunning stuff in terms of how you generate new ideas and new capabilities. And I think the second part of that is it's great to have an ideas engine, but then you need an agile organization that can actually adopt and embed them quickly. So underpinning those things is still culture, and it's a culture of, how do we add the most value to consumers? How do we be the most efficient, effective producer? And how do we stay current with the market? And it's interesting, the great ones, the Apples, who are brilliant innovation engines, have also the best supply chain. So they've developed, and for those folks online, demand-driven value networks. So they actually sense demand in real time and adjust product supply to maximize value, and sometimes undersupply the market to create demand so that they can, extend the life of their products longer than others. And so they're highly intuitive, highly agile supply chain, leveraging their, creativity. So really, really good case study on that one.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. In public healthcare, there was a drive to digitalize 30 years ago, and it was resisted. With all the money spent on consultants over the years, and ADHB still has paper forms. How do you encourage efficiency? Is it best done by reducing access to funds to drive a need for efficiency?
I think actually there's been a couple of good ones, and in terms of health, ultimately it's about how the users engage with technology. if it makes their life easier, speeds it up, reduces their travel, makes them more efficient, and improves their morale, then it's usually adopted. If technology is ineffective, it crashes, it doesn't work, it creates rework, and actually the purpose of embedding it was to create reporting and sheets for management levels, as opposed to making the job more effective, then it tends to fail, because the people who have to make it succeed aren't committed. And I've seen a few of those in health, where some ill-informed implementations with all the right intentions, but actually made the end user's life, which was typically the nurse or the first level folks, made it worse. And so they ended up either giving up and needing more people to manage a broken process, or the process was thrown out because it was so painful. So it's about what are we trying to fix, and where is the value, and who's the customer? Is the customer the manager getting the report, or is the customer the patient or the nurse?
Indeed. We've got a couple of minutes left. We'll just end on this question from Greg. Are we bold enough in talent recruitment in New Zealand, prepared to take a chance rather than the stay steady approach? So looking beyond the need this type of experience to this person brings these broader skills and experience that we can really leverage beyond the job description.
Oh, that might be a better one for you, Dave.
Yeah, I mean, my 2 cents is, in general, most organizations are not bold enough. I mean, the classic is, I need somebody with industry experience, and that's prioritized way above where it should be. I think it's an easy proxy for capability in what is a challenging thing to do. I mean, there's very, very few organizations around the world that get hiring right. I mean, even Google, who have studied this endlessly, have said they can't really find much correlation between the processes that they've tried and the actual conversion to performance on the job. So I think people look for easy proxies, and one of those, this person's been in the industry for some time, is a kind of a useful one. I think the other dimension here is time. I mean, we were all time poor. We were all kind of need the solution yesterday. But in my experience, the sort of the higher quality firms, if I can put it like that, tend to recognize that you're going to get a better outcome if you give it a little more time. It doesn't need to be delivered tomorrow. If you wait a few weeks, you're not necessarily only picking at the low-hanging fruit. You can then look at the whole tree and all of the fruit, and then pick the one that's right for your needs. So yeah, I definitely think there is a kind of, I need the solution now, and I need something that's going to be a safe pair of hands, versus looking more broadly and thinking in multiple dimensions about talent.
I agree, and I think you've hit it on the head there. Folks who are good people managers can operate in any industry, in my experience. There's a little bit of familiarization, but the skill is manage people, grow them, lead them, provide a vision, support, cajole, chastise when you need to, but know how to create the culture. And if you can get your hands on those folks, they're gold. And we need more of them.
Yeah, well, it's interesting what you said earlier about the access to sort of world-class talent, because with the big OE, such an important part of New Zealand culture. We meet so many people that have gone offshore and come back with some amazing skills. Just unfortunately, I guess in a country of 5 million people, there's probably not enough of them to go around.
Yeah, but we've got to grow them. So the answer to that is, let's grow them. Folks like Procter and Gamble only promote from within, so they take a view on training, which is somebody we're recruiting today could be with us for 40 years, and we're going to invest in their personal asset to make sure they could lead the business in the future. And so it's a whole different mindset to how you grow talent. And I think we have to look at that collectively. At an organizational level, I'd implore any organization to be thinking about how you're going to grow your own talent, rather than rely on the market to do it for you, and then dip into that pool and be surprised that you may not get what you want. But if we're all growing talent, then the whole place gets better.
Absolutely. Absolutely agree. Well, look, that's been fantastic, Ian. Really appreciate that kind of tour through all the different dimensions of productivity and where we can gain some ground. Thanks everybody for making the time to come along. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. We will get the recording out over the next few days or early part of next week, and look forward to seeing you again for the next one, maybe in a couple of months' time. Ian, thanks so much. Really appreciate you joining us.
No, thank you. Enjoyed the chat, and I hope folks online got some value. So appreciate that and appreciate your attendance.
Awesome. Thanks, Ian.
Thanks.
Catch you later.